Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. One of the more universal human habits is to keep track of time. All those who are capable of doing so do it in one way or another. We count seconds when we need to, minutes when we want them to go faster, hours when we need to keep track of our day, days so that there is some order in our lives, weeks as a way of organizing the days, months so we know where we stand in terms of planning our lives, and years to record personal and collective history. There are both longer and shorter periods of time than these, but they have little to no effect on our personal lives. This practice is universal among human beings and probably has been for the whole of recorded history, if not considerably longer. Nobody knows when human beings first started keeping track of the time. The most obvious method, the day, is used by animals and even by plants to some degree. Of course, there is little to no indication of any animals actually keeping track of the days in any organized manner. This, it would seem, is a uniquely human endeavor. When it comes to other natural measures of time, such as the month or the year, things get a bit more complicated. The changing of the shape of the moon would have been obvious to everyone, but when did they start counting the months? The years are even more difficult to keep track of, and this was probably something that began with agriculture and permanent settlements. Artificial units of time, the seconds, the minutes, the hours, the weeks, and the centuries, probably had to wait until the advent of writing and the development of arithmetic. Why would anybody invent something like the second or the minute if they didn't have a way of counting them and organizing them into groups? The week is completely artificial, but as far as anybody knows, it has its origins in the Bible. This text, possibly on its own and without any collaboration, introduced this unit of time to the world, and it somehow caught on. With rare exceptions, the week has been part of the universal timekeeping system around the world for many, many centuries. Why do we do all this? Babies don't take part in any of it. People who have lost their minds tend to be partially or completely oblivious to it. But all of the rest of us do it, and we consider it something of supreme importance, even if it is really nothing more than a convenient means of putting some order into our lives. But that alone, it would seem, is justification. We keep track of time because it allows us some control, however psychological it may be, over the haphazard and fatalistic world we live in. Examining the distinct units of time, it becomes clear that most are really nothing more than a convenience. Seconds, minutes, hours, and weeks are really just great ways of keeping track of something, however pressing or trivial, scientific or fun that thing is. Years allow us to notice and acknowledge that life is passing by and will not go on forever. They also give us a window into the historical processes and our place in the world. Months were the most natural system of long-term timekeeping. They gave us a path through the years and a way of grouping the days into units that presented a larger picture on the changes that took place. They had the natural clock of the moon, which was visible to everyone and venerated as the heavenly calendar. But it was always the day which was the most basic, as it remains now. There is nothing like a sunrise to recognize as the start of something, or the sunset to recognize as a close. With the invention of electric lights, the night became much more practical, so the natural division between day and night has been enshrined as the great divide in the perpetual flow of time. Everything revolves around the day and the night. We have clocks to keep us in tune with the course of the day, but we all know that we are subject to a heavenly process that doesn't care about our pressing needs. The Jewish calendar, among many others, facilitates this keeping track of time through these units. The days all lead to Shabbat, which is the seventh day of the week. Each one has its own perceived independence, but they are all part of the week, which itself is a way to keep track of Shabbat. The months figure into all of this with the celebration of the holidays. These are either historical or agricultural celebrations, which use both the days and the months of the year to be systemized into the calendar. The years are not really part of the calendar, since a new year simply means starting the cycle all over again. But they do figure into the Jewish calendar, since so much of Judaism, both personal and collective, is linked to history. The Bible itself only mentions days, weeks, months, and years. There are no seconds, minutes, or hours. There are many times in the Torah in which any of these units are mentioned in some way, but there are long sections where things seems to be somewhat timeless. The time reckoning for the creation story is the day, but this only makes it seem all the more timeless. The Garden of Eden has no flow of time, neither does the story of Cain and Abel. It is only with the flood that we really enter into some sort of calendar, but all through Genesis, things are a bit hazy. We are usually not really sure how many years have gone by from one event to another. In Egypt, with the Exodus, things get more systemized. It took place on the 14th day of the first month of the year. From there until the book of Leviticus, a calendar is followed. But with Leviticus, that largely ends. It is difficult to know how much time took place in this book, or if any really did at all. With Numbers, things pick up where the Exodus left off, but there is an abrupt gap of about 38 years, which goes without mention. Deuteronomy is also a bit timeless, as it really is a look back into the past and forward into the future. It happens that there is one section of the Torah which really puts the cycle of the year into perspective. It comes up in this week's Parsha. The Parsha is called Emor, which means say. This nondescript title introduces a series of laws that mainly concern the Kohanim and requirements for offerings. This is typical Leviticus material, but around the halfway point, it goes into the biblical calendar, or at least how it revolves around the annual celebrations. First, Shabbat is mentioned, which is the only celebration not linked to a month. Next comes Pesach on the 14th day of the first month, a commemoration of the Exodus. Following this is a unique calendrical event called the Counting of the Omer, a 49-day count between Pesach and the next holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot, which means weeks, is the end of this count. The count is of both days and weeks. This Omer period and its culmination in Shavuot is really the only time the Torah mentions weeks. Following this is an unnamed holiday on the first day of the seventh month, which has come to be called Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later is Yom Kippur, followed by the 8-day harvest festival called Sukkot. Then there is a long gap of about a half year in which nothing takes place on the biblical calendar. It has since been filled in with Hanukkah and Purim, but these are not mentioned in the Torah. Let's focus on the counting of the Omer period, which is really the only one that doesn't fit in with the pattern. The others are all celebrations of a historical event, such as the Exodus, or a natural event such as a harvest, or a spiritual gathering such as Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. This Omer period doesn't seem to celebrate anything. Nothing of historical note happened during this 49-day stretch. Subsequent Judaism related the holiday of Shavuot with the giving of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, but none of this is mentioned in this Parsha or any other. The period seems to be related to agriculture, since it is initiated by the bringing of a sheaf of the first barley harvest. This sheaf is really the meaning of the word Omer. The key verses of this 49-day period are the only time this count is mentioned in the Torah. Quote, "You shall count 7 complete weeks after the day following Shabbat," which happens to be traditionally interpreted as Pesach. "From the day of the bringing of the waved Omer, they shall be 7 complete weeks. Until the day following the 7th Shabbat, you shall count 50 days and then bring a new grain offering to Hashem." That's it for the Omer. There is no commemoration of anything and no indication that anything of importance happened or happens during this time period. Judaism later singled out a single day of this 49-day count as a separate celebration. This is what is known as Lag BaOmer, which means the 33rd day of the count. This has become a major celebration in many circles in modern Israel, but it is hardly mentioned in Jewish texts prior to the 19th century. So what is this count all about? There isn't a clue in the Torah to answer this question. Since this is the only time this count is mentioned in the entire Bible, any answer has to come from these verses. But the verses themselves say nothing other than to do the count for both weeks and days. This lack of a solid source to really explain this count allows us to speculate on what the purpose of it may be. Perhaps there really is nothing to commemorate with this count. Perhaps nothing of note happened, or at least nothing worth celebrating with the biblical holiday. But there is something to do, which may be just as important as the commemoration of a historical or natural or even spiritual event. This is the commemoration of the counting of time. This perhaps is what the Omer count celebrates. It celebrates the counting of the days and the weeks. It celebrates the fact that we can do this and that we do. This passing of time is perhaps the defining feature of existence. Time is always passing. The recognition of this passing of time and keeping track of it is perhaps the most uniquely human trait in our large collection of human traits. We do it incessantly and religiously. We do it historically and emotionally. We use it to express our anticipation and our boredom, our moments of joy and our recollections of tragedy. The Omer is the Torah's way of telling us to do this with religious conviction for at least one extended period of the year. Each day that goes by, another day of the count is recorded. With each week, another week must be added to the total count. It can be surprisingly difficult to make it through the whole count without missing a day. But for those who manage this Herculean feat, the reward is knowing that one has fulfilled this biblical command to recognize and record the miracle of the passing of time. Shabbat Shalom.